NVIDIA says CEO Jensen Huang will hold a briefing with the media in Beijing on Wednesday. A pair of bipartisan U.S. senators sent a letter to Huang on Friday about his China trip, asking him to not meet with companies working with the Chinese military or Chinese intelligence. The lawmakers asking him to refrain from also meeting with entities named on the U.S. restricted export list. In an interview with CNN yesterday, Huang downplayed concerns NVIDIA chips will help the Chinese military.
We don't have to worry about that because the Chinese military, no different than the American military, will not seek each other's technology out to be built on top of it. They simply can't rely on it. It could be, of course, limited at any time. Not to mention, there's plenty of computing capacity in China already. They don't need NVIDIA's chips, certainly, or American tech stacks in order to build their military.
I think that Jensen Huang, in his remarkable appearance on GPS, on FinVid show, which is a great show, made a very compelling case that we need to have, just like the dollar is the currency of the world, he wants his chips to be the currency of the world. I think that the White House still feels that they weren't able to close the back door to China of really high-end NVIDIA chips like they felt with DeepSeek Singapore. And I think that there are people within the White House who just say, I don't really care what Jensen says. We're not playing ball with the Chinese. Now, that's where I think they are right now.
Certainly, Jensen's been making the rounds. He was on MSNBC last week. And then, as Jim said, with Fareed Zakaria over the weekend. Take a listen to that.
We don't have to worry about that because the Chinese military, no different than the American military, will not seek each other's technology out to be built on top of it. They simply can't rely on it. It could be, of course, limited at any time. Not to mention, there's plenty of computing capacity in China already. If you just think about the number of supercomputers that are in China, built by amazing Chinese engineers that are already in operation, they don't need NVIDIA's chips, certainly, or American tech stacks in order to build their military.
Jensen with Fareed Zakaria. I know you're interested in this debate between various elements of the AI community about whether or not jobs benefit or lose.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a considerable cohort, including Anthropic's. Smart guy. I mean, I know that Jensen praised him. Darius basically saying, listen, there are going to be a lot of white-collar jobs lost, and I think that there will be. But I also think there'll be a lot that will be made. I'm with Jensen on that. I'm with Jensen on that we should own the common currency of his stack. Notice he didn't say the chips. Even there was a little bit of what we would call some sort of a chyron, showing that when he meant stack, he meant all the software. I think Jensen's right, but I think that the administration just feels, and this is reflecting, I think, what the administration may be saying is, you go ahead, go to Beijing. Go ahead. See you later. Do a good job. They're not saying represent the United States as much as I thought they would. They get it in their heads that be more open-minded. Jensen made a very compelling case that you want everything built on us. And the military doesn't want us necessarily, but so therefore it's not nearly as convoluted as the White House thinks. But I go back to that. They never really got satisfied about the back door of number one, A1 chips that comes from other countries. They're just not satisfied. And I don't know how to get them satisfied. I think they just think, listen, it came through Singapore. It could happen again. And I come back and say, well, why not just give them the dumb chips, the not so great chips, and then they won't do the back door. They'll have what they need to write. I just don't think that. Look, Jensen was on Mad Money, and he was saying, look, I have great faith in the system. And he does. The system has been miraculous for him. I just think that there are just a lot of people in the White House who are still worried. That's all I'm saying.
Huang's going to Beijing later this week. That'll be his second visit to China this year. Joining us to discuss this morning, Stacy Rasgon, Bernstein Research Managing Director and Senior Analyst. Stacy, good to see you again.
You too.
Is Jensen swimming upstream when it comes to some of the hawks in this administration?
I mean, he's always going to be. There's always going to be hawks, and clearly there's an enormous move to limit the transfer of technology, especially in this space, to China. That being said, I don't think he's incredibly wrong, right? I mean, the performance levels and capabilities of the parts that they were allowed to ship even before was already very, very limited. So even if the Chinese wanted to build on that, I mean, there are local alternatives from Huawei and everything else that actually have quite a bit better performance than what NVIDIA was allowed to sell. Those thresholds have now been lowered even more. I mean, right now, NVIDIA technically can't even sell anything to there, and we're driving more and more reliance within China on those local alternatives. I actually think that's where he's absolutely right, by the way. Like, part of the problem with limiting even the lower end parts that they were able to ship before is you're encouraging, and he alluded to this, you're encouraging the growth of local ecosystems into a massive developer base that is already there. And you run the risk over time of that Chinese market entirely like moving away, forget the military, even in the non-military applications, to local alternatives if they're not allowed to serve it. But the performance levels and capabilities and stuff that they were selling already, I don't think they were incredibly suitable, especially for high-end like military development. So I don't think he's necessarily.
So what's your modeling on whether or not the administration loosens the leash a little bit, and what would that mean for the stock?
Yeah, you bet. So, I mean, in terms of China itself, it's all upside from here because they've zeroed it out of the model. So we have, and I think hopefully the street is doing this. They kind of said this. There's no China data center revenue there now. So if the administration does loosen those restrictions, which, by the way, I would not be holding my breath for necessarily, or if NVIDIA can work around it, there's been lots of, speculation that they are working on new products that come in below the recently lowered thresholds. To the extent that they can sell anything in China at this point, it would be upside, I think, from where current numbers stand.
Why is he going there again?
Look, it's a big market, right? I mean, it's not a market that I think they can afford to ignore, regardless of hawks in Congress or whatever. I mean, it's an enormous market. They've got a lot of developers, a lot of demand, and they've got to be able to try to serve that market to the extent that they can. I think he's hopeful. Clearly, he's hopeful that they'll be allowed to do something there, and he's got to keep those relationships. And he's kind of walking a tightrope, right? I mean, seems to be in very good with the Trump administration. He seems to have been good so far at maintaining that relationship, but at the same time, he can't ignore everything else that's going on either. So I think he has to make the trip.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang is heading out there for a media briefing, I believe it is, in a couple of days' time. And in fact, some kind of see him as a go-between between China and the U.S. on the trade front. So what do we expect out of that trip? And with the China sanctions more broadly that are supposed to possibly snap back in August if they don't comply with conditions?
Yeah, that's right. His trip is being very closely watched here. It was actually announced on CCTV, so on the state broadcaster. He's seen as a big rock star here, as he, of course, he is in the United States. As you said, there's going to be a briefing later this week, and that's going to be at the start of a big supply chain expo. So this is the first time that he's going to be attending it. At least those are the reports at this time. And when you mentioned his importance in the U.S.-China trade deal, or in the U.S.-China trade relationship, it is seen as very important. It's something from the Chinese perspective. They want to see movement when it comes to AI restrictions. They want to be able to maintain that line of communication. So from the Chinese perspective, there's an expectation that they're going to use that leverage, this huge market that Jensen Huang wants to be able to access.
Right, absolutely. Eunice, thanks. Appreciate it today. Eunice Yoon up late for us in Beijing. My next guest has some thoughts on what's really going on with Jensen Huang's visit to China. Derek Scissors is Asia economist at the American Enterprise Institute. Derek, it's good to see you. And you think that I don't know, is he the Derek Rodman here?
Well, he just met with President Trump a couple days ago. Obviously, Jensen Huang goes to China a lot. He talks about China a lot. But in this case, the meeting with Trump, I think, is specially timed. In other words, it wasn't long scheduled. It isn't a normal thing like his trips to China. So I think it's very likely he has a message. And the message may not be very long or very detailed. And if not a message, then he'll represent Trump's attitude when he met with him. Because I don't think, Jensen Huang came in to see the president and didn't talk about China.
You think, in other words, he's a go-between between the two leaders?
Yeah, I don't want to exaggerate as if, he's the key figure in U.S.-China relations. I just think when somebody is heavily involved in the U.S.-China commercial relationship, as NVIDIA is, and he's the CEO, and he travels to China all the time, and is, as said, a rock star in the United States, you don't meet with a president right before you go to China and not carry some information with you. I just think that's very normal.
What do you think is the right approach the U.S. should take with NVIDIA? Should it be do everything to constrain their leading-edge technology from being deployed in China for as long as possible, even if that amounts to an 8-month delay or Huawei leapfrogs? Or should it be give them market access, the best companies will always win, we will always have the best companies, and so forth?
Well, it's certainly not the second one, because the best companies don't always win. The companies that have massive state backing and steal IP or acquire IP in various ways often win, and that is, in fact, the Chinese strategy. I guarantee you that if you were speaking candidly in private, Jensen Huang would say, of course the Chinese are targeting NVIDIA. Not next year. They're not going to drive NVIDIA out of business next year, but in the next 5 or 10 years, they will target NVIDIA, and it isn't a function of the best company. It's a function of who has competitive advantages either on their own or, in the Chinese case, often provided by the government. So, letting the market run free, that's not what happens. It's not what China does in technology or anywhere else. And so that's a very optimistic view of what will happen with NVIDIA and with chips 5 years down the road.
All right, I hope you're all doing well today. NVIDIA finished the day about 0.5% lower. We have multiple pieces of NVIDIA news to cover. I'll get to the China news in a moment, but first I want to quickly mention today's news that Meta will invest hundreds of billions of dollars into compute build-out in the coming years. This involves multiple multi-gigawatt clusters. One of these data center projects is named Prometheus, which is a 1 gigawatt data center that should come online in 2026. And then another data center named Hyperion will eventually scale up to over 5 gigawatts over several years. Keep in mind that a single 1 gigawatt data center translates into tens of billions of dollars in revenue for NVIDIA. This is a big deal. Now let's talk about what's happening later this week. So this week, Jensen Huang is visiting China and meeting with leaders. And later this week, Jensen is scheduled to speak at a media event in Beijing on Wednesday. We don't know what he will talk about, but last week the Financial Times reported 2 things. They reported that Jensen would visit China, which turned out to be true. And they also reported that NVIDIA is preparing to launch a new chip in the Chinese market as soon as this September. Now I don't know if that is correct or not. That being said, the FT did accurately report on Jensen visiting China before we knew about it. If NVIDIA announces a new chip for China that would translate to many billions of dollars in additional revenue that analysts are not currently factoring into their estimates. And so, if we get confirmation of a new China chip from NVIDIA that is compliant with export controls, then I would not be surprised to see NVIDIA stock trade higher on the news. That being said, introducing a new chip into the Chinese market would also introduce some additional risks to the situation. First, I think the current administration would be much more proactive in implementing export controls than previous administrations were. It would be very unfortunate for NVIDIA to announce a new chip for China, only for the administration to then place a new export control on that chip shortly after it's announced or launched. That would be very unfortunate. I don't know if that will happen or not, but it's a genuine concern that I have, and I'm mentioning it just in case so that you're prepared. If NVIDIA unveils a new China chip, the stock would most likely trade higher on the news. At the same time, if the administration decides to hit that new chip with a new export control, then the stock would most likely trade noticeably lower on that news. And so it's important to be careful with this situation in the short term and have reasonable expectations while maintaining a long-term perspective. Because regardless of what happens with the China situation in the short term, I seriously expect NVIDIA to be worth more in the years ahead than it is today. Even without China, NVIDIA is still growing as demand is so strong. And if NVIDIA is able to re-enter the Chinese market, that is additional upside. And while I don't know what to expect in the short term, there is still so much to like about NVIDIA, both financially and technologically, and I really like the setup for NVIDIA as we move through the second half of this year. Blackwell has ramped extremely fast, and Blackwell Ultra has launched with the production ramp expected to really accelerate in August and September. After Blackwell has ramped, we should see gross margins return to the mid 70% range late this fiscal year, as NVIDIA forecasted. NVIDIA has massive sovereign AI deals both in the Middle East and Europe. In Europe alone, there are 20 sovereign AI factories being planned, along with many other data centers being planned by European companies. The deals in Europe and the Middle East can help offset what NVIDIA is missing out on in China. Vera Rubin should launch in 2026, with a Vera CPU being NVIDIA's first custom CPU. And something many people may not realize is that a single Kyber rack will consist of 576 Rubin GPUs. GPUs. Yes, the current Blackwell systems contain 72 Blackwell GPUs, but later on a single Kyber rack will contain 576 Rubin GPUs, which is 8 times as many as the Blackwell systems. Combine this with the backdrop of hyperscalers like Meta increasing their capex by billions of dollars, and I think it's very clear where this trend is heading. NVIDIA continues delivering performance upgrades that directly increase their customers' AI revenues. And the performance upgrades are so substantial that NVIDIA's customers have no choice but to continue purchasing NVIDIA's latest products in large quantities. Remember that with NVLink Fusion, customers can now use accelerators, including TPUs, from other companies inside of the NVIDIA systems. And NVIDIA maintains a strong competitive moat across both hardware and software. CUDA is such a massive advantage for NVIDIA, and it gives developers the assurance that what they build will run efficiently. We are in an AI race wherein companies do not have months to waste for their developers to try to learn how to develop on a new platform. If they build on CUDA, they want to stay on CUDA, and that is a massive benefit for NVIDIA as they maintain their competitive moat. Looking ahead, be prepared for potential announcements of semiconductor tariffs. If that happens, I would not be surprised to see NVIDIA stock trade lower on the initial news. But if that happens, do not panic, because I would expect it to just be a short-term negative reaction that has no impact on NVIDIA's long-term future. Plus, NVIDIA has been working with partners such as TSMC, Foxconn, and many others to aggressively onshore manufacturing to the US. All right, so here is the short summary of what to expect moving forward. We have a media event with Jensen Huang this Wednesday from Beijing. We don't know what specifically he will talk about. If we get confirmation of a new China chip, I would not be surprised to see the stock trade higher in the days following. But be prepared in case we get news of another export control on that new China chip if we get it. And if we get news of semiconductor tariffs, do not panic, as it would likely just be a short-term reaction with no impact on NVIDIA over the long term. I seriously think this company has a lot of runway ahead of it, and I think we will see multiple trillions of dollars added to NVIDIA's market cap over the next 5 years. Jensen believes the world's computing capex will reach $1 trillion annually by 2030. If he is correct, which he usually is about this stuff, then NVIDIA should be worth substantially more in the years ahead than it is today. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective, and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.